The chamber is open and full of whispers.
The troll is still loose somewhere above him. He can hear it, or rather, he can hear what it leaves behind. The distant crash of stone. A corridor of screaming that cuts off too quickly. The specific silence that follows when 300 children decide that running is wiser than watching. Severus Snape does not go upstairs. He has been waiting 11 months for this specific window. He will not waste it on a troll. The dungeon corridor is empty. Every professor, every prefect, every well-meaning member of staff has been pulled toward the chaos on the second floor. That was the design. It is a good design. He recognizes it because he has used it himself. Create the noise where you want people to look. Do the work where they are not looking. Quirrell is better at the misdirection than Snape gave him credit for. He will not make that mistake twice. He will not make any mistake tonight. The phosphor compound is already laid. He spent 3 weeks in August drawing the array on the dungeon floor, 2 inches beneath the visible stone surface, using a tracer solution that evaporates on contact with torchlight. In complete darkness it glows, faint, cold, the color of old bone. He does not light a torch. The reliquary sits in the center of the array, 12 centimeters tall, pale crystal, clear as water except for the faint prismatic film across its sealed lid that comes from the alchemical binding agent, rendered from Prince Grimoire instructions he has had memorized since he was 19, and sitting alone in his mother's kitchen with her handwriting under a Lumos charm, copying the Latin derivatives onto fresh parchment because he did not trust the original pages. To last another decade. The grimoire was 300 years old when Eileen Prince received it. It was not given. It was left. There is a difference. He stands at the edge of the array and checks the reliquary's seal. It holds. He draws a controlled breath through his nose, releases it, and notes with the cold, clinical corner of his mind that his hands are not shaking. Good, he draws his wand. Not for the incantation. Wand work has no place in alchemical soul binding, but for what comes first. What comes first is the man. Quirrell arrives 9 minutes later. He comes from the direction of the 3rd floor staircase, which means he has been up there, checking on the stone's protections, or checking on the troll, or doing whatever the fractured, co-occupied thing wearing Quirrell's face does when it thinks no one is watching. He walks with that characteristic hesitation, the slight left lean, the way his head tilts 3 degrees to the right when Voldemort is thinking, and Quirrell is simply serving as the instrument of that thinking. He stops in the doorway of the dungeon. The torchlight from the corridor behind him throws his shadow forward, long and strange, and for 1 second Quirrell's silhouette does something that Quirrell's silhouette should not be able to do. It reaches. Then Snape speaks. "Close the door," he says. Quirrell closes the door. The darkness drops, completely. The array ignites. It is not dramatic. It does not surge or bloom. It rises the way water rises in a vessel, evenly, from every point at once, filling the room with a cold pale light that has no flicker to it. No warmth. It illuminates everything with the flat, total clarity of a thing that does not care what it reveals. Quirrell's face does something complicated. The eyes go through 3 expressions in 2 seconds, and only one of them is Quirrell's. Severus. The voice comes out wrong. Too smooth. Quirrell has not spoken with that particular smoothness all year. What is this? Containment array, Snape says. Prince line. Pre-statutory. You will not recognize it. The head tilts again. The other expression takes full hold of the eyes. You cannot, it says. The pronoun is deliberate. That is not Quirrell speaking. I have been watching you since September of last year, Snape says, the same way he delivers a correction to a second year who has added the wrong number of porcupine quills. Even, surgical, watching Quirrell initially, because Quirrell was the weakest point in this school's staff, and weak points are invitations. Then watching what Quirrell was hosting. You are not subtle, my lord. You are simply surrounded by people who benefit from not noticing. A pause. The pale light of the array holds. You noticed, Voldemort says. Quirrell's mouth has stopped moving the way it does when Voldemort speaks alone, the lips pressed thin at the corners, the jaw held still by a will that is not the jaw's owner. I notice everything, Snape says. It is what you trained me to do. I am returning the education. He speaks the first line of the incantation. It is not in Latin. It is older than Latin, a derivative the Prince family preserved because they were academics, when being academic about magic was still considered a form of service rather than a form of arrogance. It sounds like Latin the way that stone sounds like wood. The shape is there. The function is entirely different. It lands in the air of the dungeon and sits there, because old words in old arrays do not disappear. They accumulate. Quirrell screams, not in pain, or rather, not in Quirrell's pain. What screams is the passenger, and the scream has no voice behind it, no air, no throat being used correctly. It is what sound would look like if sound were being torn in two directions simultaneously. Quirrell's body doubles forward. His hands hit the stone floor. The turban unravels at one end, spilling loose, and in the pallid array light the back of Quirrell's skull, what is on the back of Quirrell's skull, is briefly, clearly visible. Snape does not look away. He has seen worse. He has done worse. He speaks the second line. The reliquary begins to glow from its center, not the prismatic shimmer of the binding film. Deeper, the kind of light that has no color, because it predates the conditions that created color, pure and cold and ancient, the light of a process that the universe permits but does not encourage. You will not, Voldemort starts. I am already doing it, Snape says. Third line. Quirrell's body lifts 3 inches off the floor, not gracefully. There is nothing graceful in the alchemical separation of a displaced soul fragment from an unwilling host-passenger arrangement. It is slow and terrible, and it sounds at its peak like the moment before a mirror breaks, that specific, sustained, hair-thin note of something structural failing from the inside. Then Quirrell comes down. He does not fall. He descends, the way a building descends when the thing holding it up has been removed, straight down, every part of him arriving at the floor at approximately the same moment. He was already mostly gone before tonight. He was Quirrell the way a house is the family that used to live in it. The structure remained. The inhabitant had been elsewhere for some time. The reliquary screams. It is a silent scream. It registers as pressure, behind the eyes, at the back of the throat, in the specific joint of the jaw that aches when something is heard at the wrong frequency. The crystal goes black from the center out, the blackness spreading with the slow radiating certainty of ink dropped into still water. And then the prismatic film seals, and the room is quiet in the complete structural way that rooms are quiet when the thing that was wrong with them has been removed. Snape speaks the seal. 4 words. The oldest 4 words in the Prince Grimoire, written on the document's first page in a hand so old, it has ceased to be individual handwriting and become instead something more like carving. The reliquary's film turns gold and goes cold and fixed. It is done. Severus Snape stands in a dungeon in Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on the 31st of October, in the year 1991, at 7:43 in the evening, and looks at what he has done. Quirrell is on the floor. The reliquary is sealed. The array fades now, its purpose completed. It has no reason to persist, and old magic is efficient in exactly this way. It does only what it was built to do, and then it stops. The phosphor compounds dissolve. The dungeon returns to torchless dark. He stands in it for a moment. He is thinking about Lily Potter. He is thinking about Lily Potter the way he has thought about her every day for 10 years, which is to say, precisely, concisely, with the practiced discipline of a man who learned early that grief only becomes bearable when you refuse to let it become vague. He knows the specific shade of her eyes. He knows the particular way she held a wand when she was uncertain about a spell. Slightly too far down the handle, the knuckles white. He knows that she would have had things to say about tonight. Complicated things. Several of them contradictory. He knows that her son is in this school. That the boy is alive because of tonight. That is not why he did it. He did it because Dumbledore was not going to. Not yet. Not in the way that mattered. Not without first engineering a narrative in which an 11-year-old child who had been treated as a plot device for his entire short life was required to serve as one again. Snape has spent 17 years as someone else's instrument. He is finished with it. For Lily. For himself. For the particular and uncomplicated reason that some things are wrong and should be stopped by whoever is in the position to stop them. And tonight, in this dungeon, that person was him. He picks up the reliquary. It is warm. It should not be warm. He notes this with the part of his mind that catalogues alchemical anomalies, sets it aside for later examination, and wraps the vessel in the lead-lined cloth he prepared in August, the same month he laid the array. Because preparation is not caution, preparation is the acknowledgement that you intend to succeed. He straightens his robes. He walks to the dungeon door, opens it, and steps into the torchlit corridor. Above him, somewhere on the second floor, he can hear professors organizing the aftermath of the troll. He can hear Dumbledore's voice, calm, clear, carrying even through stone, directing students back toward the Great Hall. Snape turns toward his office. He has a report to write. He has 3 days of preparation ahead of him before he walks into the Ministry of Magic and changes the legal architecture of the wizarding world with a 12-centimeter crystal and 17 years of documented intelligence. He has a great deal of work to do. For the first time in a very long time, he finds this satisfying. The Visengamot convenes an emergency session on a Tuesday, which is unusual. Emergency sessions are traditionally held on Thursdays, a procedural convention so old that no one alive can explain its origin, and so entrenched that departing from its signals, before a single word is spoken, that whoever called the session considered the matter too urgent to respect tradition. Cornelius Fudge considers this as he takes his seat at the head of the chamber. He has been Minister for Magic for 3 years. In those 3 years, he has convened 2 emergency sessions. Both were on Thursdays. He straightens his lime-green bowler hat and looks down at the chamber floor. Severus Snape is already there. Standing at the witness position, not sitting, standing, because no one told him to sit and he has not chosen to, wearing his teaching robes with the addition of a single formal element, the Prince family seal on a chain at his collar, silver, oxidized to near black with age, the kind of object that announces lineage without announcing itself. He is holding a lead-lined case approximately the size of a bread loaf. He is looking at nothing in particular with the total, patient attention of a man who has been waiting considerably longer than the 12 minutes the chamber has kept him. To his left, on the evidence table, Quirrell's body, covered, the St. Mungo's preliminary report beside it. 3 years of Snape's surveillance notes, organized chronologically, bound in black. In the third row of the gallery, Lucius Malfoy looks at the covered body, and then at the lead-lined case, and then at Snape, and his expression does something careful and controlled that is not quite recognition, and is not quite alarm, and is in fact both. "My Lord Minister," Snape says, before Fudge has finished the opening sentence. "Before we establish the agenda, I would like to clarify the scope of this session. The scope is broader than the memo indicated," Snape says. "I apologize for the discrepancy. It was deliberate." "Proceed," Fudge says, "because there is, in the event, nothing else to say." Snape opens the lead-lined case. No theater, no ceremony. He sets the reliquary on the evidence table with the same economic precision he uses to add an ingredient to a cauldron at precisely the correct moment. The chamber is quiet. The reliquary is black at its center. The prismatic binding film has held. Around the crystal's core, the darkness has a quality to it that does not quite behave like an absence of light. It moves, very slightly. In a way that darkness should not move, the way that something contained rather than simply absent has a pressure to it, an awareness of the container. Several members of the Visengamot lean forward. Several lean back. "What you are looking at," Snape says, "is a soul fragment, specifically, the displaced wraith form of Tom Marvolo Riddle, contained within a Prince-line alchemical reliquary on the evening of October 31st. The containment is permanent. The entity within is not dead in any conventional sense. It is, he considers the word with the precision of a man who chooses words the way he chooses reagents. Fixed. It will not deteriorate. It will not escape. It will not grow." The chamber absorbs this. "You're saying," Fudge begins carefully, "that you have. Inside that, yes," Snape says. The dark, yes, Fudge looks at the reliquary for a long moment. Then he looks at his hands. Then he looks back at the reliquary. "Merlin," he says, very quietly to no one in particular. "The preliminary documentation is before you," Snape continues. "Saint, Mungos has confirmed that Quirinus Quirrell's body bears physical evidence consistent with extended dual occupancy, the specific cellular degradation pattern that results from a foreign magical consciousness using a human nervous system as sustained infrastructure." The report is on page 3. He lifts the bound surveillance notes. "I am additionally submitting 17 years of intelligence documentation regarding the activities, associates, and ongoing operations of the organization, formerly led by the entity now contained in that vessel. Names, dates, locations, meeting minutes from inner circle gatherings attended in my capacity as a double agent operating under the authorization of Albus Dumbledore, then Chief Warlock of this body. I am submitting this documentation not as confession but as evidence. There is a difference. I trust this chamber understands that difference." In the third row, Lucius Malfoy has gone very still. Snape turns to face the chamber directly. "In 1981, he says, I received a conditional pardon from this body on the strength of Albus Dumbledore's testimony and my own sworn account of my activities as a spy. The pardon was conditional because the evidence at that time was testimonial rather than material. I was believed. I was not proven." He pauses. "I am now proven." He petitions under Article 14 of the Ancient Charter of Service for 3 specific remedies: conversion of his conditional pardon to full exoneration, formal recognition as the primary instrument of the Dark Lord's defeat, and formal guardianship of Harry James Potter. The last request produces a sound from the chamber. "On what grounds?" Fudge asks. "Harry Potter has resided for 10 years with Muggle relatives under a guardianship arrangement made unilaterally by Albus Dumbledore, without Wizengamot review, without formal documentation, and without any recorded welfare assessment. I have petitioned the Department of Child Magical Welfare for those records. There are none. There are none, because none were ever created." Snape's voice does not change register. He is not arguing. He is informing. A child under wizarding jurisdiction has resided for a decade in a Muggle household under an arrangement this chamber never approved, never reviewed, and never questioned. I am not asking this body to determine whether that arrangement was adequate. I am asking this body to acknowledge that it never asked. "Dumbledore is not here," Snape says. "He was informed of this session. He sent his regards." Which is true. The note had arrived at Snape's office at 7 a.m., expressing, in terms that were warm and imprecise in the specific way that Dumbledore was imprecise when he wished to avoid being quoted, his confidence in the Wizengamot's judgment and his full support for the proper outcome of the proceedings. He had not said which outcome he considered proper. That, too, was characteristic. The exoneration vote takes 11 minutes. It runs 38 in favor of full exoneration, 6 opposed, 3 abstentions. Fudge signs the amended record with the expression of a man who has just realized that the history books will note what happened in this chamber today. The guardianship petition takes longer, not because the legal argument is weak. No welfare records, no Wizengamot review, an arrangement made by a private individual with no formal authority to make it. A child who has arrived at Hogwarts without the basic magical knowledge any wizarding-adjacent child would possess. These facts are entered. They are not contested. Guardianship vote: 32 in favor, 9 opposed, 6 abstentions. It is at the close of the session that the reliquary's appendix is entered into evidence, a procedural formality. All supporting documentation must be formally catalogued. The appendix is the index, names, cross-referenced by incident, organized by year. It runs to 42 pages. Lucius Malfoy's name appears on page 1. It appears 14 times across the appendix, not as allegation. As record, dates, locations, the specific inner circle function he attended, the decisions made, the orders given, the names of the people those orders concerned. 14 entries, each one sourced, each one cross-referenced, each one entered into the formal legal record by a clerk who is simply doing his job and will think about what he has just filed for the rest of his professional life. Snape does not look at Lucius Malfoy when the appendix is entered. He does not need to. In the corridor outside the chamber, Fudge catches up to him alone. "Snape," Fudge says, his breathing not quite controlled. "What you did in there, the petition, the appendix, you understand that certain people will." "Yes," Snape says. "The political implications alone, yes, Dumbledore will." "Also yes," Snape says. He closes the case and straightens. "Minister, for 10 years, this ministry told the public that the Dark Lord was gone, and that the boy who survived him was safe and well, and that the wizarding world could proceed accordingly. None of those things were entirely true. I have now provided you with the material evidence to make the first one true in a way that is verifiable, permanent, and requires no one's testimony to sustain. The other matters are yours to address." Fudge stares at him. "Congratulations," Snape says on the outcome of today's session. He picks up the case. "I have a potions class on Thursday. I should prepare." He walks down the ministry corridor without looking back, the sound of his footsteps precise, and even, and unhurried. The sound of a man who planned for this and is done with the planning and has already moved on to what comes next. Snape sends the owl on a Wednesday, not to Harry. To McGonagall, because McGonagall is Harry's head of house, and because the correct procedural sequence matters even when, especially when, the situation has no established precedent. The note is 4 sentences. It informs her that the Wizengamot guardianship order has been finalized, that Harry Potter is now legally his ward, that he will be informing the boy directly this afternoon, and that he would appreciate her presence in the event Harry requires a familiar face during the conversation. McGonagall arrives at his office door at 4:08. 7 minutes early. She stands in the doorway in her tartan robes and looks at him with an expression that contains, in roughly equal measure, approval of the legal outcome, deep personal reservations about the specific individual who achieved it, and the professional composure of someone who has been teaching 11-year-olds for 30 years and has learned that her own feelings about a situation are almost never the point. "He doesn't know you," she says. "I'm aware. He knows of you. He's been in your potions class for 2 months. That is not the same thing." "Also aware." She looks at the office. "He has not changed it for this meeting. He's a good boy," she says, not as a warning. As a fact, she is providing, because she considers it relevant data. "I know what he is," Snape says. "I knew his mother." A pause. McGonagall absorbs this in the way she absorbs most things that are true and complicated, completely without comment, filing it in the part of herself where she keeps the things she thinks about later. "I'll bring him at 4:30, she says, and leaves. Harry arrives like he is not sure whether he is in trouble. This is, Snape notes, the default posture, shoulders slightly drawn. Chin at the angle of someone who has learned that entering a room confidently invites correction, a careful blankness across the features that is not stupidity and is not defiance, and is in fact the cultivated neutrality of a child who has spent years reading rooms before committing to a response. He stands in the doorway of the potions office and looks at Snape, then at McGonagall standing to one side, then at Snape again, and waits. He has his mother's eyes. Snape has known this since September 1st. He has had 2 months to become accustomed to it, and he has not become accustomed to it, and he does not expect to, and he has allocated this fact to the category of things that are simply true and must be worked around rather than resolved. "Sit down, Potter," he says. Harry sits, the chair across from the desk. He sits the way he stood, taking up the minimum space, committing to nothing, watching. "You are not in trouble," Snape says, because that particular misapprehension should be removed before anything else. Something in Harry's posture shifts. "Not much." "Enough. 3 days ago," Snape says, "the Wizengamot formalized a guardianship order. It transfers your legal wardship from your mother's sister and her husband to me. The order is signed, filed, and in effect as of this morning." Harry looks at him. He does not say anything. He is processing. Snape can see it, the particular stillness of a quick mind running the implications of new information before responding to any of them. "Lily did this," Lily used to go very still when she was thinking hard, and then she would ask exactly the right question, the one question that cut to the center of whatever was being discussed, and she would ask it without preamble. Why? Harry says. Several reasons. The primary one, the arrangement that placed you with the Dursleys was made without Wizengamot review or formal welfare assessment. Legally, it was not sound. When I petitioned to have it examined, it did not survive examination. The secondary reason, Snape says, is that I was your mother's friend. We grew up near each other. We attended Hogwarts together. I knew her from the age of 9 until, a beat, controlled, precise, until she died. She was the most gifted witch of her generation, and she was also, separately from that, a good person, which is not the same thing as being gifted and is considerably rarer. I am aware that she would have opinions about this arrangement. Several of them would be pointed. I am proceeding regardless. Harry's expression does something small and complicated. You knew my mum. Yes, were you friends? For a time, Snape says. It is not a simple history. I will tell you the parts that are yours to know when you are ready to hear them. Not today. Harry nods. The nod of a child who has learned that pressing for information before it is being offered tends to close the door rather than open it. What does it mean? Harry asks. Being your ward. What does it actually mean? Snape explains it in sequence, without simplification, with the assumption that the person listening is capable of understanding if the information is presented correctly. During holidays, Harry will reside at Spinner's End, his home in Cokeworth. He will have his own room. There are books. The house is not large and is not warm in the architectural sense, though it is heated, and it is quiet, which has its advantages. Within the school, the guardianship changes relatively little in procedural terms. Harry remains a Gryffindor, remains under McGonagall's house authority for day-to-day matters, attends the same classes. What changes is the emergency contact structure, the Hogsmeade Permission Authority, the medical consent documentation. You don't have to like this, Snape says. You are not required to be comfortable with it immediately. You are not required to treat me as... He stops, selects the word, as anything other than what I am, which is your guardian and your teacher, until such time as something more develops. Or doesn't. Both outcomes are acceptable. Harry looks at him for a long moment. Green eyes, Lily's specific shade of them, and behind them the same quality of attention, measuring, fair, withholding judgment until judgment is warranted. Are you going to be different? Harry asks. In class. No. Even though. Especially because, Snape says. Differential treatment in either direction serves neither of us. You will receive the same instruction as every other student in your year. If it is insufficient, I will arrange supplementary work. What you will not receive, and here his voice does something that is not warmth but is the close structural neighbor of it, is a situation in which no one is paying attention to whether you are falling behind. That is done. Harry looks at his hands for a moment. Then he looks up. Okay, he says. It is a very small word for what it is accepting. One question, Harry says. The Dursleys. Do I have to go back there? Ever. No, Snape says. Harry nods once. And the thing that moves across his face in the half-second after that single syllable is not relief in the simple sense. It is more structural than relief. The look of a load-bearing wall discovering that it no longer has to hold up the roof, that something else has been put in place, that it can simply be a wall now. It lasts less than 2 seconds. Then his face is neutral again. But Snape sees it. He catalogues it in the part of himself where he keeps the things that matter, next to 17 years of intelligence documentation and the memory of a girl with red hair explaining to him, age 9, that Willowherb was not the same as watercress, and that he should have known that, and here, she would show him. Come here. McGonagall walks Harry back to Gryffindor Tower. At the door, she pauses and looks back at Snape. She gives him a look that is not approval. McGonagall does not give approval easily and does not waste it, but is the acknowledgement that a thing has been done correctly, which from her is a distinct and separate category. He returns to his desk. The welfare assessment is still there. He reads it a third time, Not because the contents have changed, but because there are documents that require multiple readings before the mind accepts what is actually written in them, before the gap between what was and what should have been becomes a fixed, known quantity rather than an abstraction. When he has read it a third time, he puts it in the locked drawer. Then he pulls out a fresh piece of parchment and begins writing the letter to the estate agent in Cokeworth. The house requires certain modifications before December. The second bedroom has been used for storage since his mother died. It needs to be emptied. It needs to be made functional. There are practical steps in the correct order, and the practical steps are what he can do right now. So he does them. He does not think about the fact that he is preparing a room for a child who has not had one. He simply prepares the room. That is enough for tonight. The house is narrow. This is the first thing Harry notices. Not small exactly, but narrow. The way houses get when they have been built in long terraced rows with other houses pressing against them on both sides. Each one sharing walls with its neighbors like books on a shelf, upright and close and not quite touching. The street outside is cobblestone gone gray with age, and the mill at the end of it is not running, has not run for years by the look of it. And the whole of Cokeworth in December has the specific quiet of a place that was built around an industry that left and has not yet decided what to be instead. Harry stands in the narrow front hall with his trunk and his owl, Hedwig, white, currently expressing her opinion of the journey via a series of considered, pointed silences, and looks at the walls. Books, floor to ceiling on every available surface, organized in a system that is not alphabetical and is not by subject in any simple sense, but has an internal logic that is legible if you look at it long enough. Potions texts along the staircase wall. He recognizes the spines from class. They continue up the stairs and around the corner and presumably along the landing above, the collection of a man who did not stop acquiring books when he left school, but simply kept going. The shelves expanding with the knowledge, rather than the knowledge being contained by the shelves. Your room is the second door on the left, Snape says, behind him. Harry goes upstairs. The room is clean. A bed with actual blankets, 2 of them, wool, dark green. The color of someone who did not think about what color to buy but reached for what was familiar. A desk with a lamp. A bookshelf, empty, waiting. A window that looks out over the back of the terraced row. A thin strip of walled garden below. Frost on the flagstones. On the desk, a note. 4 words in Snape's handwriting. Dinner at 7. Downstairs, Harry sits on the edge of the bed and looks at the room for a moment. Then he begins to unpack. Dinner is soup. Not the kind that comes from a tin. The kind that has been made with the specific intention of being soup. Built up from base ingredients with the same care that goes into a potion whose outcome you care about. Harry eats all of it. He eats it faster than he intends to, and then stops himself and then finishes at a normal pace, and Snape does not comment on any of this. They eat in the kitchen, which is the warmest room in the house. There is a fire. We will begin work tomorrow morning, Snape says. Harry looks up. What kind of work? 3 disciplines. Occlumency, Latin, and advanced theory. The occlumency first, because it is the most urgent and the most unpleasant, and unpleasant necessary things benefit from being addressed, before the student has had enough time to develop a resistance to them. Latin because the magic you will eventually encounter at the level your situation requires has roots in pre-modern linguistic structures, and reading a translation is not the same as reading the source. Theory because you have been in Hogwarts for 3 months, and your foundational understanding of why magic works is approximately as developed as every other first year, which is to say, not. Is that what you actually think of first years? Harry asks. I think first years know a great many things that are not useful, and have not yet been taught the things that are. That is not their fault. It is a curriculum problem. A pause. You are not a typical first year. Your situation is not typical. The training will reflect that. Because of Voldemort, Harry says. Snape does not react to the name. He has never reacted to the name. This alone distinguishes him from roughly 90% of the wizarding world. Because of several things. There are things about the night your parents died that the wizarding world has not fully examined. I have. We will discuss them when you have the theoretical foundation to understand them. Not yet. Harry looks at him steadily. You keep saying, not yet. Because sequence matters, Snape says. You cannot build the upper floors before the foundation is laid. This is not condescension. It is architecture. Harry is quiet for a moment. Then, okay. One question, Harry says. 1. Occlumency. What is it actually? The magical discipline of sealing the mind against external penetration. A skilled legilimens, a reader of minds, can extract memories and emotions from an unprotected subject. Occlumency is the counter-discipline. It trains the mind to present a controlled surface, rather than an open one. Snape picks up his spoon again. You will hate the early sessions. Everyone does. You will persist regardless. How do you know I'll persist? Because you are your mother's son, Snape says, and she never stopped at anything she started. Harry does not have an answer for that. He finishes his soup. The first occlumency session is on the morning of December 27th, in the sitting room, the furniture pushed back to the walls. Snape explains the mechanics once, completely without repetition, the theory of the mental landscape, the principle of ordered thought versus exposed thought, the difference between suppression, which does not work, and compartmentalization, which does. He explains this the way he explained the guardianship, in sequence, without simplification, assuming comprehension. Then he says legilimens, and Harry's mind opens like a book dropped spine up. He extracts himself after 4 seconds and sets his face to neutral before Harry opens his eyes. Harry's expression on emerging is the one Snape has learned to recognize as the aftermath of something unwilled, slightly too much space around the eyes, the jaw set in the way of a person who does not intend to show that something surprised them. Well, Harry says. Again, Snape says. This time he goes in for 3 seconds and comes out with the same information. He does not go in a third time. Not today. The structure of your mental landscape is not what I expected for an 11-year-old, he says carefully. You have organized yourself under significant external pressure. Over a significant period of time. The organizational patterns are functional. They are also, in places, the kind of functional that develops because the alternative was worse. Harry looks at him. Can you just say what you mean? You are more defended than most children your age, Snape says, and the defenses predate any magical training. We will work with them rather than against them. It will make the occlumency faster. A pause. That is not a compliment to the conditions that built those defenses. It is an assessment of what we have to work with. Harry is quiet. Then, okay, they run 6 more attempts across the morning. By the final one, Harry manages to hold the surface closed for approximately 2 seconds before Snape finds the edge and moves through. 2 seconds is not much. 2 seconds is, for a first session, more than Snape anticipated. He makes a note of it in the logbook he has begun keeping. Not a diary. A training record. Precise and dated. And moves on to Latin. Hermione Granger comes to Spinner's End on December 30th. She arrives with her parents, who shake Snape's hand with the combined wariness and determined good manners of 2 people who have decided that their daughter's welfare takes priority over their entirely reasonable instinct to be suspicious of a man who looks like this and lives in a house like this. Harry is at the top of the stairs when she comes in. He looks down. Hermione looks up. They have spoken perhaps 12 times in 3 months at Hogwarts, most of those exchanges being the kind that happen when you are both reaching for the same ingredient. Hello, she says. Hi, he says. Snape does not facilitate further social orientation. He shows the Grangers the sitting room and provides tea, and then takes Hermione and Harry to the kitchen table and opens the Latin text and proceeds. The Dagworth Granger lineage research has been in progress since mid-November. He puts it on the table in front of Hermione while Harry is making tea. 8 pages of his handwriting, annotated, sourced. The relevant ministry record numbers in the margin. 3 centuries of the Dagworth Granger family tree cross referenced with Muggle census records from the Statute of Secrecy era forward. The chain of evidence unambiguous. her mother's line descending from Hector Dagworth Granger's brother's squib daughter, born 1743, who married a Muggle solicitor and whose surname simplified over 2 generations to Granger. She reads the first page, reads it again. "This is my family," she says. Not a question. Yes, she is very still, running implications before responding. Does this change anything? It changes your access to certain records and resources. It changes nothing essential. He meets her eyes. You were already the most capable student in your year. The name is documentation, not origin. She looks at the research for another moment. Then she sets it to one side, not away. To one side, where she can return to it. Which is different from setting it down. She opens the Latin text. "Where are we?" she says. By the end of the holiday, they have covered the first 3 chapters of the Latin primer and the foundational vocabulary of pre-modern magical notation. Harry has held his mental surface for 11 seconds against Snape's entry attempts, which is not yet functional occlumency but is the beginning of a structure. Hermione has taken the lineage research home in a folder and said nothing more about it, which means she has said everything she needed to and is now processing the rest on her own time. On January 2nd, Harry carries his trunk back downstairs for the return to Hogwarts. He is at the front door when he stops and turns. The house is quiet behind him. The books on the walls. The soup pot still on the stove from this morning. The lamp on in the kitchen even though the kitchen is empty. He does not say anything. He turns back to the door and picks up his trunk. Outside on the cobblestones, Snape is waiting. Black coat. The print seal at his collar, looking down the gray street toward the station with the patient attention of a man who has somewhere to be and has calculated exactly how much time he has to get there. Harry falls into step beside him. The mill at the end of the street stands idle in the January cold, and the cobblestones ring under their feet, and neither of them speaks, and this too is a kind of beginning. The train is 13 minutes from departure, and the platform is doing what it always does in the final minutes before 11, contracting. 3 years on this platform has given Harry the particular pedestrian fluency of someone who knows where the gaps are before they open. His trunk is already loaded. Hedwig is already aboard. He is reading, standing at the edge of the platform with a Latin primer open in his hands, one of Snape's, borrowed over the summer and not yet returned, the margins thick with annotations in their characteristic narrow hand. Hermione finds him first. She produces, from her bag, a single folded page covered in her handwriting, color-coded, cross-referenced. The kind of document that takes 4 hours to make and saves 40. A reference table for the irregular forms in the alchemical subdialect. She has made him one. She has made herself an identical copy. This is the Hermione Granger system. Solve the problem once. Document the solution. Share the documentation. Proceed. Harry takes it and puts it in the primer without looking up. "Thank you." "Ron's already in the compartment," she says. "He's been there since 10:15. He brought chess. He always wins chess. You'd think that would discourage him." "Ron doesn't find winning discouraging," she says. In the compartment, Draco Malfoy appears in the doorway on the journey north, doing the thing he has been doing since first year, measuring, recalibrating. Deciding something he has never quite decided. His gaze moves to the Latin primer in Harry's hand, moves to Hermione, moves back to Harry. "There's a rumor," Draco says, "that something's happening at school this year. A special event." "My father says." "Your father," Harry says, without heat, without particular emphasis, in the same tone he would use to read a sentence from the Latin primer, "has 14 entries in the Wizengamot's formal evidence appendix. I believe the most recent review of his imperious claim is scheduled for March." The compartment is very quiet. Draco's face does something that is not the sneer. The sneer is a performance, practiced. It has a shape he returns to when he needs it. This is not that. This is the face underneath the sneer, the one that is 14 years old and has just been handed, in a single sentence, the complete inventory of his family's precarity. He stands in the doorway for 2 more seconds. Then he leaves. "You know," Ron says, "you could have just said hello." "That was hello," Harry says, and opens the Latin primer. The Triwizard Tournament is announced at the start of term feast. Inter-school competition. Tasks, champions, age restriction of 17. Harry is 14. He is not eligible. He makes a note on a small piece of parchment, under the table, of the questions the announcement raises but does not answer. Who proposed the tournament's revival? What is the specific mechanism for entering? What do the tasks involve? And why now? He passes it to Hermione under the edge of the table. She reads it, adds 2 questions he has not thought of, and passes it back. Under the parchment, in the smallest handwriting he owns, he adds, "Who benefits?" October brings the delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. The Beauxbatons carriage comes from the southwest, blue, enormous, pulled by winged horses the size of Carthuses with coats the color of Palomino gold. The Durmstrang ship rises from the lake, black mast, dark wood, water streaming from its sides like it has come from somewhere colder and deeper than the Black Lake, which is already cold and already deep. Victor Krum sits 3 seats from the end of the Durmstrang row. Larger than he looks in the Quidditch photographs, broader across the shoulders, the posture of someone who has been observed his entire life and has learned to be still under observation rather than performing for it. He eats. He does not talk to the students around him. He watches the hall. Hermione notices Harry noticing. He reads. "Rooms," she says quietly. "Yes," Harry says. Different reason, probably, but yes. Headmaster Karkaroff walks with the specific care of a man monitoring his own peripheral vision. His eyes find Snape within 30 seconds of entering the hall, and what moves across his face is the complicated expression of a man encountering someone he owes a debt to, and would prefer not to. Snape meets his gaze, holds it for exactly the duration required to establish that he has noted the look and its contents. Then he returns his attention to the staff table. Karkaroff does not look at him again for the rest of the evening. "The Goblet of Fire goes up on Friday," Hermione says. "The age line won't hold against a determined enough external actor." "No," Harry says. "Snape will want to know what we think." He already knows what he thinks. He'll want to know if we've reached the same conclusion independently. Have we? Harry looks at the Durmstrang table, at Karkaroff's careful posture, at the hall full of people who are excited about a competition and have not yet asked the question on his parchment. "Yes," he says. Hermione nods. She picks up her fork. The interesting thing is never where it appears to be. Harry has known this since he was 11 years old in a kitchen in Cokeworth, learning that sequence matters and that the upper floors cannot be built before the foundation is laid. The foundation, by now, is solid. The Goblet of Fire produces 4 names. This is the fact that matters, stripped of the theater surrounding it. The blue-white flame, the charred parchment, the 3 names that were correct, and the 4th that is not. Harry watches the 4th piece of parchment travel from Dumbledore's hand around the staff table and back, each professor reading it. Snape reads it third. His face does nothing. He passes it left. This tells Harry that Snape already knew, or suspected, or has processed the possibility quickly enough that his face has nothing left to show by the time the parchment reaches him. Any of the 3. Probably the 3rd. In the anteroom off the Great Hall, Harry stands in the center of Dumbledore, McGonagall, Snape, Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, Bagman, and Crouch Sr., who has arrived looking like a man who has not slept in 4 days, and is managing this by applying increasing amounts of structural rigidity to his posture, and answers every variant of the question with the same answer. No. After the 4th denial, Snape speaks. The question of whether Potter entered is less productive than the question of how his name entered. The goblet's age line was keyed to Dumbledore's specific magical signature. Circumventing it would require a counter-signature of equivalent strength, or a method of submission that bypassed the age verification entirely, such as submitting the name under a 4th school classification that the goblet was not instructed to reject. He looks at Crouch, which would mean that the tournament's binding contract has been successfully attached to a 14-year-old boy without his consent. The question I would raise is whether a magical contract formed under fraudulent entry conditions carries the same legal force as one formed under legitimate ones. It doesn't, Harry says. Everyone looks at him. A contract formed by fraud isn't binding. It's basic wizarding contract law. The Visengamot covered it in the Grindelwald-era property cases. If the entry was fraudulent, the The contract is void. I don't have to compete. The room is quiet. Snape looks at him with the specific expression of a man who has laid a foundation and watched it hold weight. That would require a Wizengamot determination, Dumbledore says carefully, which would take a minimum of 3 weeks. The first task is in 4. Then Potter competes under protest. Snape says the legal challenge runs concurrently, and if the contract is voided mid-tournament, the precedent is established for future cases. He looks at Harry. You will not be unprotected. The challenge will be filed tomorrow morning. Harry looks at him. You've already drafted it. I drafted it, Snape says, when the goblet produced a 4th name. Yes, the tournament runs its course under protest. Harry competes under his own training, under Snape's supplementary preparation, under the 3-year head start that Spinner's End provided in theory and practical work. He is not the version of himself that the tournament was designed to break. He has already been broken and rebuilt at a deeper level than any task can reach. Snape's potions class, 4th year, begins on a Thursday. He stands at the front in the posture that has not changed since Harry's first day. Straight. Still. The kind of stillness that is not the absence of movement, but its deliberate suspension. 4th year represents, for most of you, the point at which the gap between students who understand what they are doing and students who have been performing competence successfully enough to avoid notice becomes legible. The NEWT preparatory track begins this year. Those of you who are on it will be required to demonstrate not proficiency, but comprehension. Proficiency means you can produce the correct result. Comprehension means you know why the correct result is correct and what happens when it isn't. He sets a list of ingredients on the board. A modified draught of peace. The modification is his. The original formula, as published in their textbooks, has 3 structural inefficiencies that their textbook's author chose not to address. Either because he did not notice them, which would be concerning, or because correcting them required a level of theoretical engagement with the underlying soul-calming mechanism that exceeded his interest in the subject, which is, in Snape's experience, more likely. You will identify the inefficiencies before you begin brewing. You have 15 minutes. The class opens textbooks. Harry does not. He reads the board, pulls a piece of parchment from his bag, and begins writing, not the inefficiencies, not yet, but the underlying mechanism first. Because Snape taught him in December of 1st year that you cannot identify what is wrong with a structure until you understand what the structure is supposed to do. Hermione, 2 benches to his left, is doing the same thing. By the time 15 minutes are up, Harry has identified 2 of the 3 inefficiencies and is constructing an argument for the 3rd. Hermione has identified all 3 and written a 4-sentence theoretical justification for each. At some point during brewing, Harry looks up and finds Snape reading his analysis with an expression that is not readable from this distance, but is not the expression of someone reading a wrong answer. Meanwhile, the Gringotts warrant for a certain black leather diary has been moving since 3rd year. Snape's legal team has been building the chain of provenance from Tom Riddle's school years to the diary's emergence in Harry's 2nd year, cross-referencing Borgin and Burke's purchase records, Malfoy family asset declarations, and the specific magical signature logged by Hogwarts wards during the chamber incident. 3 years of careful construction, each piece documented, each inference sourced, the whole thing airtight in the way that only things built very slowly and without shortcuts can be. The warrant arrives in October. The diary is found in a sealed compartment in Malfoy's study. The Gringotts examiner confirms within 6 minutes that the object contains a soul fragment consistent with the methodology of a Horcrux. The confirmation is filed. The diary is transferred to Gringotts' secure examination chamber. Snape receives the transfer notice in his office at 7:43 p.m. He reads it, sets it down, looks at the wall for a moment. He has been building toward the basilisk's venom since October of Harry's 2nd year, when Harry came to his office and explained, in the precise, slightly too fast delivery he uses when he thinks the information will be unwelcome, that he was a Parselmuth, that the basilisk was real, that Ginny Weasley had been in contact with something that was using her, and that he knew where the entrance was. Snape had looked at him for a long moment. Then he had said, "Show me." They had gone together. Snape had documented everything, The chamber architecture, the ward structures, the specific ancient magic that Salazar Slytherin had embedded in the school's foundations over 1,000 years ago. The basilisk had been aware of them. Harry had spoken to it. What Harry had told Snape afterward, in the tunnel on the way out, was this: the basilisk was old and tired, and had been under compulsion so long it had largely ceased to distinguish between its own will and the compulsion's instructions. It was not, Harry said with the careful evenness he used when he was stating a thing he expected to be argued with, what he would call evil. It was what happened to a creature that had been given no choices for 1,000 years. Snape had not argued. He had simply returned, and returned again, and over the following 2 years had secured 2 drops of venom through a process of patient, respectful cooperation with a creature that deserved considerably better than its history had given it. Tonight, at Gringotts, 1 drop of that venom on the diary's cover. The diary does not scream. That is a common misapprehension, that Horcrux destruction is dramatic, that it announces itself. What actually happens is quieter, and in some ways worse. The magical signature simply revises, collapses inward. The thing that was there, the fragment of Tom Riddle suspended in the object since sometime in the 1940s, ceases to be coherently present. It does not go anywhere in particular. It becomes the absence where something was. The diary goes inert. The documentation is filed. Lucius Malfoy's name is attached to the evidentiary chain. The Ministry will receive this document in the morning. Snape walks out of Gringotts at 11:17 p.m. into wet Diagon Alley. He stands on the steps for a moment. 2 Horcruxes in 3 years. He knows how many Riddle made, the dark arithmetic of the surveillance years, cross-referenced with the deaths that coincided with Riddle's known movements through the 40s and 50s, and the number is 7, plus the fragment he sealed in 1991. Plus the fragment in Harry's scar, which is not a deliberate Horcrux but is a soul anchor by every meaningful definition. He has been patient for 17 years. He can be patient a while longer. Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 13 years. The same cell for 13 years. The same stone walls, the same narrow window, the same sounds of the North Sea against the foundations. A sound so constant it has ceased to be a sound, and become instead a quality of the air itself. He knows the cell the way people know things they did not choose to learn, completely, involuntarily, with a fluency that brings no satisfaction. He is 45 kilograms. He has been sustained, for 13 years, by one thing, the knowledge that he is innocent. Not the hope, the knowledge. It is not comfortable. Innocence held in a place designed to extract it is not a consolation. It is a stone, heavy and cold and unyielding, and it has kept him here. Not here in the cell. Here in his mind, coherent, present, himself. The cell door opens at 2:17 p.m. on a day in January. Not the food slot. The door. Sirius stands slowly, because his legs have not been asked to hold his full weight quickly for some time, and because there is a quality to unexpected door openings in Azkaban that the body has learned to approach carefully. Sirius Orion Black, the Auror says, you are being remanded to Ministry custody pending a formal Wizengamot hearing scheduled for January 15th. You will be held at St. Mungo's for medical assessment in the intervening period. The hearing concerns a petition for your exoneration. Peter Pettigrew is currently in Ministry custody and has provided testimony under Veritaserum. Sirius looks at him for a long moment. Say that again, he says. At 3 p.m. on his second day at St. Mungo's, Snape arrives. He comes alone, wearing his teaching robes rather than his formal ones. He sits in the chair across from Sirius without being invited, because there is only one other chair, and invitation under these circumstances is a formality neither of them has the energy for. They have not occupied the same room since Sirius was 21 years old, when they were both in a hallway in Order headquarters, and Sirius had said something he has had 13 years to think about. And Snape had looked at him with an expression that Sirius at 21 had read as contempt and has had 13 years to reconsider. You look terrible, Sirius says. You look worse, Snape says. A pause. Pettigrew, Sirius says. In custody since September of last year. He was discovered in an animagus form and detained. His Veritaserum testimony runs to 40 pages. It covers the Fidelius breach, the Godric's Hollow events, and the 13 years subsequent. The Visingamot has it. The hearing is the 15th. And Harry. Harry as well. You have him. I have had legal guardianship since November of 1991, Snape says. He says this factually, without ornament. But he is watching Sirius's face while he says it, observing the landing rather than managing it. Sirius looks at him for a long moment. He was supposed to come to me. You were in Azkaban. The Dursleys were the alternative. I know that. A pause. Is he all right? It is not quite a question. It is the version of a question that has been carried in a cell for 13 years and is no longer certain of the difference between asking and hoping. He is, Snape says, the most structurally competent 14-year-old I have encountered in 20 years of teaching. He is also, at times, reckless in the specific way that people are reckless when their theoretical confidence temporarily outpaces their practical experience. We are working on it. Something moves across Sirius's face, grief and relief in the same gesture, indistinguishable at the boundary. He's like James, he says. He is like his mother, Snap says. He simply looks like his father. Another pause. Thank you, Sirius says. The words come out without architecture, without the framing he would normally put around them. 13 years of unspent things, and the first one out is that. Snape says nothing, which is its own answer. January 15, 1995. Wizengamot Chamber. The gallery is full. Snape's legal team presents the case in 90 minutes. It is not a difficult case. Sirius was not tried in 1981. This is documented. It is not contested. No one in the chamber attempts to contest it. Griselda Marchbank speaks for 11 minutes about the specific procedural failures of 1981, the emergency powers invoked after Voldemort's fall, the cases processed without standard review, the number of people affected. She does not soften it. She is 93 years old and has softened enough things in her life to know which ones don't warrant it. When she finishes, the chamber is very quiet. 38 votes for acquittal. 4 against. 3 abstentions. Sirius watches the hands go up. He counts them without meaning to, the habit of a man who learned in a cell that counting is a way of staying in contact with what is real. When the count reaches 30, he stops counting and looks at the ceiling of the chamber instead, which is vaulted stone, very old, bearing the marks of 1100 years of this institution's particular combination of competence and failure. Fudge signs the exoneration order with the expression of a man who is acutely aware that the question, why did this take 13 years, has not been asked from the floor today, but is present in the room in the way that unasked questions are present, structurally, in everything around them. He will be asked it eventually. He knows this. Harry is outside the chamber when Sirius comes through the doors. He has been there since the session began, in the corridor, with a Latin text he has not been reading. Hermione is beside him with a book she has also not been reading, which is more telling because Hermione does not stop reading for mild situations. Ron is on Harry's other side, present because that is what Ron does. Shows up for the important things without being asked, and without making the showing up about himself. Sirius comes through the doors and stops. He looks at Harry. There is a physical resemblance between Sirius Black and the photographs Harry has seen. The Order photographs. The Azkaban intake record that Snape showed him in second year with the specific, unapologetic directness of a man who believes that information a person needs is information a person should have. But photographs do not have the quality that Sirius has in this corridor, the quality of a man who has come back from somewhere that should not have been survivable and is standing here anyway, present, upright, himself. You're tall, Sirius says. His voice is still rough at the edges. You're thin, Harry says. A beat. We're working on it, Sirius says. Harry steps forward, and Sirius meets him halfway, and the embrace is slightly awkward in the way that first embraces between people who are family but strangers always are. It lasts long enough. When they separate, Sirius's eyes are doing something that he is not performing for the corridor and is not managing for an audience. Snape told me you're doing Latin at breakfast, Sirius says. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sirius glances down the corridor to where Snape is speaking with the legal team. That's very Snape. It's also useful, Harry says. Something settles in Sirius's expression. Not acceptance exactly, but the beginning of the process that leads to acceptance. The recognition that the world he is re-entering is not the world he left, and that some of the differences are not losses. Yeah, he says. Okay, he looks. At Hermione. At Ron. Back at Harry. I'm told there's a tournament, he says. There is, Harry says. And you're in it. Against my will, and under legal protest. What's the first task? We don't know yet. But we have a theory. Of course you do. Sirius looks at the three of them, and something in his face does the thing it has been doing since the chamber doors opened. The specific register that exists between grief and joy, when both are present simultaneously. Right, he says. Tell me the theory. They walk down the ministry corridor together, and Sirius listens, and the corridor is long, and the theory is detailed, and they have reached the lifts before Harry finishes. And by then, Sirius is asking questions. Good questions. The questions of someone who fought in the First War and knows which details matter, and Harry is answering them. And between them the conversation builds the way good conversations build, each question tightening the structure, each answer opening a door. Snape falls into step behind them at the lifts. He does not join the conversation. He listens to it, with the expression of a man who has been paying attention to things that are developing for long enough to recognize, when they develop correctly, what that looks like. The lifts open, they get in. The educational decree arrives at Hogwarts before the students do. This is deliberate. Fudge has learned, across 4 years of watching Snape operate inside the legal architecture of the wizarding world, that Snape responds to direct confrontation by producing documentation. And that documentation produced by Snape tends to be the kind that ends careers. The educational decree is therefore not a confrontation. It is a structural adjustment, implemented before the relevant parties are present to object. The decree establishes the office of High Inquisitor, empowered to inspect and evaluate all teaching staff and to recommend remediation, suspension, or replacement at the Inquisitor's discretion. The appointed Inquisitor is Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Dumbledore reads it at breakfast and writes 2 letters. One to Snape. One to the board. The one to Snape is 4 words. She arrives today. Prepare. Umbridge arrives with the students on September 1st. She is short, pink, decorated in the specific way of a person who has confused projection of authority with accumulation of it. She smiles with all of her teeth and none of her eyes, and the smile is deployed continuously, at everyone, with the uniformity of a thing that has been practiced until it no longer requires thought. Defense Against the Dark Arts. 5th year. The room rearranged into an examination hall configuration. The new textbooks, Defensive Magical Theory, contain no defensive magic. They contain a theory of defensive posture premised on the assumption that actual conflict with a dark magical adversary is unlikely, and that most situations can be managed through avoidance. Harry opens his to a random page, reads 2 paragraphs, identifies the problem and closes it. When Umbridge pauses, he raises his hand. The practical component. When does it start? The curriculum this year is focused on theoretical foundations. We're 5th years. Our OWLs are in June. The Defense OWL has a practical component that accounts for 40% of the grade. If we spend the year on theory, we fail the practical. The Ministry has reviewed the OWL curriculum and is confident that the Ministry, Harry says, in the same tone he uses to read the Latin primer, is not taking the OWL. We are. The classroom is very quiet. 5 points from Gryffindor. Harry nods, once, and opens the textbook. He does not read it. The report to Snape happens that evening. The blood quill, Snape says, before Harry has finished. I haven't seen it yet. You will. It is her standard instrument for detentions. It carves the written lines into the skin of the writing hand. The wounds are self-inflicted by the tool's mechanism, and therefore technically outside the Ministry's definition of staff-administered physical punishment. He says this with the flatness of a man reading the definition of a thing he finds contemptible. She has used it at every previous posting. The ministry's position is that the categorization is legally defensible. I have a different position. He opens a drawer and removes a folder. The documentation framework is prepared. When it begins, and it will begin within the month, I need medical evidence. Photographs, witness statements, nothing circumstantial. You built this before the school year started, Harry says. I built it in August, Snape says, when the Inquisitor appointment was announced. Harry looks at the folder. Then, and the Peverell Trust Clause. Hermione mentioned it. Lady Dagworth Granger, Snape says, and it is not quite warm but is the closest register to warm that Snape's voice achieves, is correct. The first Bloodquill detention happens on October 20th, Neville Longbottom, for asking Umbridge what the practical relevance of Chapter 7's avoidance protocols was to an actual encounter with a dark, magical creature. Hermione notices his hand. She sends a message to Harry. Harry sends a message to Snape. 3 words. It has started. Snape's reply arrives in 4 minutes. 2 words. Document everything. Over the following 3 weeks, Snape's legal team receives 7 medical assessments from the school healer, 14 witness statements from students who received detentions, photographs taken by Hermione with a Muggle camera she has carried since 3rd year on the principle that Muggle documentation methods are underutilized in the wizarding world, and Harry's log of every detention issued, its stated cause, its duration, and the documented injury. The file, when assembled, is 4 inches thick. Harry's application for the Defense Study Group, formerly titled the Practical Defense and Magical Theory Cooperative, because Hermione drafted the application and Hermione's document titles are always the version that will survive scrutiny, is filed the same afternoon Umbridge issues the decree prohibiting student organizations without inquisitorial approval. It lists Snape as faculty supervisor, includes a full OWL practical curriculum, and requests the room of requirement as meeting space. After 11 days and a follow-up from Snape's legal team noting the response deadline had passed, approval arrives the following morning. February 20th, 1996, Snape files the complaint on a Tuesday, because Tuesday is when the Visengamot's Judicial Review Subcommittee meets and complaints filed before 9 a.m. are heard the same day. The complaint is against Dolores Umbridge personally, and against the ministry institutionally, for permitting an officer of the ministry to deploy an instrument of harm against minors under the legal fiction of definitional categorization. It requests immediate suspension of the High Inquisitor appointment pending investigation, and an emergency review of all educational decrees issued under that authority. The Peverell Trust Clause petition is filed simultaneously by Harry, as head of the Peverell line, challenging every educational decree issued to date on the grounds that none received the required 2/3 Visengamot supermajority mandated by the 1612 founding charter. Amelia Bones issues the temporary suspension by 2 p.m. She does this with the expression of someone who has read a 4-inch file and is managing the specific professional anger of a law enforcement officer who has discovered that harm was being done inside an institution that was supposed to prevent it. The Peverell Trust Clause petition reaches the full Wizengamot floor on March 3rd. The debate runs 4 hours. The ministry's legal team argues that subsequent legislative revision supersedes the 1612 charter. Snape's legal team produces the specific text of every subsequent revision and demonstrates clause by clause that none of them explicitly repealed the trust clause because none of their drafters knew it existed, it having been in continuous operation without contestation since its establishment. The vote: 26 in favor of sustaining the trust clause and voiding the challenged decrees. 23 against. 1 abstention. Fudge signs the order that voids 6 months of his own policy, with the expression of a man doing arithmetic on his political future and not liking the sum. Umbridge is reassigned to the Office of Improper Use of Magic Registration. It is a department that processes paperwork. It does not have students in it. This is the entirety of the relevant consideration. After the session, Harry falls into step beside Snape in the ministry corridor. Fudge, Harry says. Is finished, Snape says. Not today. Not formally. But the arithmetic has changed. He has lost every significant legal challenge since the tournament. The people who support him now do so from inertia, rather than conviction. Inertia runs out. The students who got detentions, Harry says. Neville, the others. Does it come off the record? Bones has sealed the detention logs under the investigation file. The detentions are now evidence rather than disciplinary record. Yes. Harry nods. The corridor behind them is the same gray stone it always is, the torch's standard issue. Nothing about it looks like a place where anything was just decided. This, Harry has come to understand, is where things are actually decided. In corridors, in paperwork, in the specific sequence of documented complaints and procedural petitions and correctly filed legal challenges that do not look like power from the outside, but are, in their effect, more durable than any other kind. The kitchen table at Grimmauld Place has disappeared. Not literally. It is still there. 12 feet of scarred oak. What has disappeared is its function as a kitchen table. It is now an operations surface, covered in maps, genealogical records, Gringotts access documentation, and the Prince Grimoire's soul theory section reproduced in Hermione's handwriting across 14 sheets of parchment, cross-referenced and annotated in 3 colors of ink with a system that took her 2 days to develop. Sirius has been given the chair by the fire. Not from sentiment. It is the warmest position in the room, and Sirius, 2 years out of Azkaban, still runs cold in a way that is not about temperature. He is looking at the map. Walk me through the sequence again, he says. Hermione picks up the red quill. She has been awake since 4. This is visible primarily in the fact that her hair has been tied back with a potion's ingredient label because she ran out of proper ties an hour ago and considered this a solvable problem. 7 Horcruxes confirmed, she says. The Wraith fragment, destroyed in 1991, is off the table. She touches the map. The diary, destroyed 1994, also off the table. 5 remaining. She marks them. The locket, currently at Grimmauld Place, Creature has it. The ring, at the Gaunt Shack in Little Hangleton. The cup, in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. The diadem, in the Room of Requirement at Hogwarts. And Nagini, Riddle's serpent familiar, confirmed carrier by diagnostic last month. She can be tracked. And the 8th? Harry says. The room is quiet. The 8th, Hermione says, is the reason we're doing the others first. And it is the reason Chapter 11 of this document exists, and is sealed. She puts the red quill down. 5 Horcruxes in 1 summer, plus Nagini before the final confrontation. That is the sequence. That is what we're here to plan. The instrument is basilisk venom, Snape says. He is standing at the end of the table, present, lateral, not occupying the center. We established in 1994 that it dissolves the soul fragment at the essential level. We have 3 collection vials from the last Gringotts session, sufficient for 5 objects with controlled application. And Hogwarts, Ron says from the other end of the table. He is the only person in the room who has slept a normal amount, which makes him, at 6 a.m., the most functionally alert person present. The Room of Requirement. How do we get in during summer? School's closed. Dumbledore, Harry says. Everyone looks at him. He knows more than he's told us. He's been watching this for 20 years. He has information we need, specifically, confirmation on the 8th Horcrux and the complete count. We ask him. Directly, he looks at Snape. You've been not returning his letters for 4 years. Yes. Snape says. It's time to return 1. Snape considers this for a moment. He has been doing his own arithmetic on this question for longer than Harry has been raising it, and the arithmetic has been pointing in this direction since February, when the Wizengamot session produced outcomes that made the political cover for a direct approach no longer necessary. He has been waiting, not for the right moment, but for the right question. Harry is asking the right question. I'll write it today, Snape says. Dumbledore arrives at Grimmauld Place on July 7th. He comes through the flue at 11 a.m. and stands in the kitchen doorway and looks at the table, the maps, the records, the annotated grimoire pages, with the expression of a man who has been watching a game develop from a distance, and has just been invited to see the board up close. He looks at Harry. You've been thorough, Dumbledore says. We had good material, Harry says. Sit down. Dumbledore sits. He folds his hands on the table in the position of a man who has decided that this meeting requires him to receive, rather than direct. He looks tired. He has looked tired since this conversation became inevitable, the expression of a man who has been carrying a specific piece of knowledge for 15 years and has been waiting, without quite admitting it, to be asked for it directly. "The eighth Horcrux," Harry says. "Tell me what you know." "The night Voldemort attacked Godric's Hollow," Dumbledore says, "he performed the killing curse on an unintended subject. His soul was already so fractured by that point that the additional fracture, the one caused by the act, produced a spontaneous fragment, expelled rather than deliberately contained. That fragment attached to the nearest living magical vessel." He looks at Harry. Harry holds his gaze. "My scar," Harry says. Yes, the kitchen is completely quiet. Sirius is looking at the fire. Ron is looking at Harry. Hermione picks up the sealed folder from last night and opens it, because the confirmation has been given, and the information is now active rather than theoretical. "You knew since when?" Harry says. Not accusatory, the same tone he uses to establish timeline in any operational context. "Suspicion from 1981. Confirmation in 1993 when I was able to examine certain records that became available through the Azkaban investigation." A pause. "I had intended to tell you at the appropriate moment," Snape says. The word is flat, precise, and contains within it the entire history of what Dumbledore has considered the appropriate moment for 17 years. Dumbledore accepts this. "Yes, I was wrong to wait. Tell me what you need." "Access to Hogwarts," Harry says. "The Room of Requirement. July 15th. And before the term ends, the ritual chamber beneath the astronomy tower for the procedure on the scar. The diadem and then the eighth," Dumbledore says. "Then Voldemort," Hermione says, "is mortal and doesn't know it." Dumbledore nods. He looks at the table, at the sequence laid out across it, and for a moment he simply looks at it. The maps, the documentation, the careful handwriting in 3 colors, with the expression of a man revising, in real time, his understanding of what preparation looks like and who does it. "I'll arrange it," he says. July 10th. Little Hangleton. 2 a.m. The gaunt shack is exactly what the records describe, a ruin that has been subsiding into the earth for 50 years, surrounded by nettles and the specific smell of a place saturated with dark magic for so long, the soil itself has changed character. Harry stands outside it with Snape. The cold knock is audible from 30 feet, the familiar register of a Horcrux's displaced soul fragment radiating outward through whatever contains it. There is also something else. The ring carries a curse layered on top of the Horcrux architecture, old, destructive. A Slytherin-era compulsion curse modified for lethal delayed activation. It would kill whoever put it on within a month. Snape neutralizes it from outside the shack. 4 lines of pre-statutory Latin, and the curse's outer layer dissolves with the sound of nothing, which is more final than any dramatic sound would be. They go in. The ring is on the floor. Gold, black stone bearing the Deathly Hallows symbol, the triangle, the circle, the line. Harry does not look at the stone. He knows what it is. He knows what the stone does, and he knows that knowing this and not touching it are the same decision. He opens the collection vial. 1 drop of venom on the ring's setting. The fragment goes the same way they always go, inward, then absent, the magical signature revising, the Horcrux ceasing to be coherently present. Harry wraps both ring and stone in lead cloth without touching the stone directly and puts them in the case. He looks at Snape. 4, Snape says, counting from the beginning. July 13th. Gringotts, 9 a.m. The Lestrange vault is so deep, the temperature drops 15 degrees between the main hall and the vault door. The cup is on a shelf on the left wall, gold, badger embossed. The Helga Hufflepuff provenance, visible in the metalwork style for anyone who knows what to look for. Which Hermione does, because she spent 4 days in the Hogwarts Historical Archive specifically learning what to look for. She does the extraction herself. Her choice, stated plainly 2 weeks ago, the cup is Hufflepuff's. The Lestranges are in her file from the moment she started building the DMLA complaints, and she has been working toward this specific vault for 8 months. 1 drop. The cup's fragment dissolves. The cup itself, once the soul matter has cleared, is a remarkable piece of 16th-century magical metalwork. Beautiful, actually. In the way that things made before beauty and function were separated are beautiful. Hermione looks at it for a moment before logging it for the Hogwarts Historical Collection. 5, she says. July 15th. Hogwarts. Room of Requirement. 11 Coloro Am. Dumbledore meets them at the entrance. He speaks the room into existence. The door appears. Inside. Everything. 1,000 years of hidden things. Towers of furniture and trunks. Broken equipment. Items put here and forgotten. And put here deliberately and forgotten differently. And stacked by the generations of students who needed somewhere to put a thing. And found this room and did not ask why it was available. The diadem is in the deep interior. The cold knock pulls Harry through the landscape of abandoned objects. Hermione's directional grid active in her left hand. It is on a bust of a warlock. Silver, fine, complex work, a Ravenclaw's eagle in the setting. A motto in ancient Latin along the inner band, "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." Hermione reads it, and says nothing. Harry opens the vial. 1 drop. The 6th fragment goes the same way as the others, inward, absent, the architectural revision of a soul structure ceasing to maintain coherence. Harry picks up the diadem and holds it for a moment. It is, outside the Horcrux, simply a diadem. Old magic in the silverwork. The real Rowena Ravenclaw's object, restored to itself, no longer occupied by something that should not have been in it. Ron is at the room's entrance when they come back through. 6 for 6, he says. 7 if you count 1991, Harry says. 7 then. He looks at Harry. How do you feel? Harry considers this. Like there's one more, he says. Ron nods. Yeah, I know. The accounting. October, Dumbledore's office. The office is exactly as it always is. Every surface bearing something that rewards attention. The silver instruments on their spindles. Fawkes on his perch in the corner, currently in a non-burning phase. The feathers full and deep crimson. The eyes alert in the way that phoenixes are alert, which is total and without the anxiety that attends alertness in lesser creatures. The portraits are awake. All of them. Watching. They know this meeting was coming. Harry sits. Hermione sits beside him. Snape stands at the window. Dumbledore looks at the three of them with the expression Harry has been learning to read across 5 years of intermittent contact, not the performance of wisdom but the actual article, which looks different. Quieter, less curated than the performance. He looks tired. You asked for this meeting, Dumbledore says. Yes, Harry says. Harry does not use notes. The sequence is in him now, has been in him since the week they spent preparing it. He starts in 1980. The prophecy, Trelawney's, delivered to Dumbledore at the Hog's Head, known to Voldemort in partial form through a Death Eater's interception. Harry recites the relevant portion from memory. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. You received that prophecy, Harry says, and you made a decision. You decided that the child described was the instrument through which Voldemort would ultimately be defeated. You built a plan around that decision. Every element of that plan, the Godric's Hollow protection, the blood wards at Privet Drive, the placement at Hogwarts, the stone as bait, was oriented toward a single outcome, that I would face Voldemort directly, and that the confrontation would be, in some form, the resolution. Dumbledore does not deny this. The problem, Harry says, is that the plan required me to not know what I was being prepared for. Not stupidity, ignorance. The ignorance of someone who responds to threat instinctively rather than strategically. Someone who walks into the final confrontation because he loves the people behind him rather than because he has calculated the odds and chosen the field. He pauses. That was the plan. A boy who doesn't know enough to be afraid, who goes forward, because going forward is all he has. The office is quiet. Fawkes shifts on his perch. One of the portraits, Phineas Nigellus, sharp-featured, is looking at the ceiling. Yes, Dumbledore says. His voice exactly what it always is, measured, deep, the voice of a man who has spoken carefully for so long that careful speech has become his natural register. That is substantially accurate. And the 8th Horcrux, Harry says. The one in my scar. That was part of it too. I did not know with certainty until 1993, Harry says, which means for 3 years you knew that your plan required me to die, not risk death. Die. Walk into Voldemort's killing curse and die, on the theory that the Horcrux would be destroyed and the blood protection would bring me back. He looks at Dumbledore. That was the entire final chapter of the strategy. A 16-year-old boy who loves his friends walks into certain death because someone who loved him once gave him a protection that might operate correctly under specific conditions you could not fully control. Silence. Snape speaks from the window. Say the part you haven't said yet. Harry looks at Dumbledore. I'm not angry, he says. I want to be precise about that because anger would let you redirect this conversation toward my emotional state rather than the accounting. I'm exact. I want the accounting to be exact. Dumbledore nods. Once, you are the most capable wizard alive, Harry says. You defeated Grindelwald. You built the Order. You have forgotten more about magic than most people will ever learn. And you looked at a 14-month-old child and a set of prophecy conditions, and you decided that the child's life was a resource to be allocated toward an outcome. He pauses. Not because you didn't care. I know you cared. That's actually part of what I need you to understand. The caring and the allocation were happening simultaneously, and you let them coexist. You told yourself they weren't in conflict. Dumbledore's hands, folded on the desk, do not move. Lily died to protect me, Harry says. That's real. The blood magic is real. The protection is real. But you didn't put me at private drive only for the blood protection. You put me there because controlled isolation produces a specific psychological type, someone defined by the rescue, by the belonging they've been denied, by the love they'd do anything to protect. You needed me shaped a particular way. The Dursleys were useful for that. Harry, I'm not finished, Harry says, and his voice does not rise. Snape found me in a cupboard under a staircase. Not metaphorically. An actual cupboard. With a cot and a light bulb, in which I had been living for the better part of 10 years. You knew the Dursleys. You knew what they were. You left me there anyway. The portraits are very still. I know why, Harry says. I'm not asking you to explain. I'm asking you to hear the accounting without explaining it. Just hear it. What it cost. Dumbledore is looking at him. Something in the old face has changed. Not dramatically, not the collapse of a pretense. Because Dumbledore's face has not been pretending. What changes is subtler, the specific way a person looks when they have been carrying a weight long enough that they have ceased to register it as weight, and then someone names it, and the naming makes it present again, all at once. I hear it, Dumbledore says. His voice is, for the first time in Harry's experience of him, entirely without architecture. The cupboard. I told myself the blood protection required proximity, and the isolation was a cost of that necessity, and you would be safe from Voldemort, and that was the paramount. He stops. I am giving you the explanation again. Yes, Harry says. You are. A pause. Dumbledore takes it. I am sorry, he says, not for the strategy. Not for the choices I made about Voldemort, about the prophecy, about the resources I had and how I deployed them. For those choices I will account differently, at a different time, before a different judgment. But for the cupboard. For 10 years with people who I knew would not be kind to you. For making that choice and never returning to examine whether it was still the right choice. For the welfare assessments that didn't exist because I didn't file them. For the Wizengamot review that didn't happen because I made a unilateral decision and no one was in a position to challenge it. He looks at Harry. For treating your life as a resource. For the period in which that is accurately what I did. Harry looks at him for a long moment. Okay, he says. It is a very small word for what it receives. Dumbledore understands this. The portraits understand it. Fawkes makes a sound, not the full song, a single note, brief and clear, and then is quiet again. Hermione speaks for the first time. She has been sitting beside Harry through the entire accounting, present, her presence a specific kind of support that is not intervention and not absence, but the support of someone who knows when the person beside them needs the room and holds it for them. Now she speaks. The plan going forward. The 8th Horcrux extraction. Snape has developed a protocol based on the Prince Grimoire's Soul Matrix chapter. Controlled magical suspension, Annam Salve application, timed to the moment of maximum fragment instability. Harry goes to the threshold. Not across it. The fragment loses its anchor. Snape dissolves it. She looks at Dumbledore. We need the Hogwarts ritual chamber beneath the astronomy tower. You will not leave him at the threshold alone, Dumbledore says. No, Snape says. From the window. I will not. Dumbledore looks at Snape. This look contains something that has not been in any previous exchange between them in Harry's presence, not the mutual wariness of the long game, not the careful management of a complex alliance. It contains, briefly, what it would look like if Albus Dumbledore said thank you to Severus Snape in a language that is not words. Snape receives it without comment. The chamber is available from the 15th, Dumbledore says. Is there anything else? Harry looks at the portraits. At Fawkes. At the silver instruments on their spindles, still turning. Sirius should be here, Harry says. For the procedure. He's asked, and I want him there. Of course, Dumbledore says. And after. When it's done and Voldemort is mortal, I want to be the one who finds him. Not because of the prophecy. Because I've been preparing for 5 years, and I want to be there at the end of my own story. Dumbledore looks at him. That is, he says, a very different sentence than the one I planned for you to say. Yes, Harry says. It is. Something in Dumbledore's face does what faces do when they have revised a long-held expectation and are encountering the thing that replaces it. Not disappointment. Not relief. Something more complex than either. The expression of a man who built a plan around a particular version of a person and is meeting the actual person for the first time. You will be there, Dumbledore says. At the end of your own story. Yes, Harry stands. At the door, he stops. He does not turn around. The plan you built, he says. The version where I don't know enough to be afraid. The boy who goes forward because going forward is all he has. A pause. I'm not that boy, I want you to know. That's not a loss. It's better this way. For everyone, including you. He opens the door. They go out. The portraits begin talking the moment the door closes. All of them at once. The accumulated voices of 1,000 years of Hogwarts headmasters suddenly released. Dumbledore sits in his chair and lets them talk. Fawkes leaves his perch, crosses the room, and lands on the desk beside Dumbledore's hands. He does not sing. He simply sits there, warm and present and breathing, the way that things which cannot fix something can nevertheless stay with you while you carry it. Yes, Dumbledore says, to nothing in particular. I know. The chamber beneath the astronomy tower is older than the tower above it. This is architecturally evident in the stone. The tower's foundation cuts through the chamber's ceiling at an angle that suggests the tower was built around what was already here. The walls are original Hogwarts construction, pre-Founders era stonework in the style of the 9th century, dry fitted without mortar. The warding is old enough that it does not register on standard diagnostic grids, magic so integrated into the physical structure that the distinction between the enchantment and the stone has ceased to be meaningful. Hermione spent 2 days examining it and concluded, in the specific language she uses when she is being honest about the limits of her understanding, that it was older than the techniques she had to measure it with. It will hold. Snape has been here since 9. The alchemical array on the chamber floor is the most complex thing he has ever drawn. Not in terms of individual rune complexity, but in terms of integration. 7 distinct runic systems operating simultaneously, each one performing a different function. Each one timed to the others with the precision of a mechanism whose components must engage in exactly the correct sequence or the mechanism does not function at all. He checked it 3 times. Then he had Hermione check it. Then he checked it again. Harry arrives at 11 with Sirius and Ron. Hermione is already in the chamber. running final diagnostics on the monitoring grid she built into the array's eastern section, a system that tracks magical vital signs with more granularity than anything St. Mungo's uses, because St. Mungo's equipment was not designed for this specific procedure, and Hermione's was. Sirius looks at the array on the floor and does not say anything for a moment. Then, how long? 7 minutes, Snape says. At the threshold, not across it. The fragment becomes unstable when the host's vital functions suspend. I apply the Annam salve at the point of maximum instability. The fragment dissolves. Harry comes back. And the margin, Sirius says. Between the approach and irreversibility. 90 seconds, Snape says. If the procedure is not completed within 7 minutes and 30 seconds of suspension onset, the margin closes. I will complete it within 6. Sirius looks at Harry. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I know what it's for. I know what it costs if you don't. He puts a hand on Harry's shoulder briefly, with the careful, earned quality of 2 years. I'm going to be here when you come back. I know, Harry says. Ron looks at Harry with the expression he gets when something matters too much to be spoken usefully. He nods. Harry nods back. Harry lies on the stone platform at the array's center. The stone is cold against the back of his neck. He looks at the chamber ceiling. The old stone. The cut of the tower foundation above. The dark. Snape moves through the array's outer ring, activating each section in sequence. The runes don't illuminate dramatically. They change quality, the phosphor compounds shifting from inert to active as a change in the stone's surface rather than as produced light. The chamber temperature drops 4 degrees. Hermione's monitoring grid begins its readings. Baseline established, she says. Scar resonance at standard register. Fragment stable. Snape moves to the array's northern position. Harry looks at the ceiling. The suspension onset is the 3rd incantation. You will feel it as a withdrawal. Your magical signature will begin to recede from the scar outward. This is correct. Do not resist it. At the threshold you may experience content from the fragment, memory or constructed image. The fragment's last defensive function is projection. It will attempt to produce something that makes you pull back before the procedure completes. You will not pull back. I know, say it as a decision, Snape says. Not as agreement. Harry looks at the ceiling for a moment. Then, I will not pull back. Snape looks at him one more time. The look does not contain anything performed, no reassurance manufactured for the occasion, no warmth that isn't there in the normal register of things. What it contains is the same quality it has always contained. Across 5 years of Latin at breakfast and occlumency sessions and the training record maintained in the locked drawer at Spinner's End. Attention. Complete, undivided. The attention of someone for whom the outcome of this procedure is not abstractly important, but specifically, personally, structurally important in ways that Snape will not narrate and does not need to. He raises his wand. The first incantation. Pre-statutory Latin. Prince line. This dialect now as familiar to Harry's ear as English. The array's containment function activates, a settling, the sensation of a space that has decided to be the correct shape for what is about to happen in it. The second incantation. The monitoring grid intensifies. The third incantation. The suspension begins. It is not like sleep. Sleep is a withdrawal the body chooses and manages. This is a withdrawal being conducted on the body by something external and precise. The magical signature receding from Harry's periphery inward, pulling back from his extremities, converging toward the center and then toward the scar, the process orderly and sequential in the way that only something very carefully designed can be orderly and sequential. He feels the scar. He has felt it before. The cold knock, the fragment's passive radiation, the presence that is not his presence that has been in this location since he was 14 months old, and has been there so continuously that there have been years when he could not distinguish between where he ended and where it began. Now he can feel the boundary. The fragment is a cold thing at the center of a warm one, and as his own magical signature recedes, the distinction becomes absolute. Here is Harry. Here is the fragment, and they are not the same, and have never been the same. The cohabitation simply long enough that the distinction required this procedure to make legible. The threshold arrives as a quality of stillness. Everything slows. His chest moves, but he cannot feel it moving. The chamber ceiling is there, but the information is arriving without urgency, without the animation that attends ordinary perception. The threshold is not darkness. It is the suspension of the directive that turns sensation into experience, the mechanism offline, the body present and the processing paused. The fragment projects. He knew it would. Snape told him. He prepared for it. What it shows him is Lily. Not a memory. He has no memories of her, has only the photographs and Sirius's accounts, so the fragment cannot use memory. It builds her from what it has access to, Harry's own longing, the shape of the absence, the specific emotional frequency of a loss sustained since before consciousness. It builds her very well. She is standing in the chamber and she is looking at him, and she is real, in the way that the things produced by very old magic operating on deep feeling are real. She says, "You don't have to." Harry looks at her. He knows what this is. He knows it is not her. He knows it is the fragment's final function, deploying the specific content most likely to produce a pull toward the surface, toward the warmth away from the threshold and the dissolution. He looks at her for the duration of one breath that he cannot feel himself taking. Then he says, to the fragment, to the cold thing at his center, "You're not her. She would tell me to finish it." He stays. Snape speaks the Annam Salve. He has spoken it 5 times before, for the diary, the locket, the ring, the cup, the diadem. Each a variant calibrated to the specific soul fragment's architecture, the incantation modulated each time to match the containment conditions. This is the most complex modulation. A living host requires a different approach than an object. The fragment in an object has no attachment architecture except the object itself. The fragment in Harry has spent 16 years threading itself into the scar's neural magical interface, with the specificity of something that has had time to become structural. Snape is operating at the thinnest margin of his technical capability. He knows this. He has known it since July when he fully mapped the procedure. He has spent 3 months reducing the unknown variables to the irreducible minimum. The preparation is the thing that makes the margin wider. It is the only thing that makes the margin wider. He speaks the incantation sequence. 4 minutes, Hermione says, her voice level. Fragment destabilizing. Scar resonance dropping. The dissolution begins. The fragment's magical signature losing coherence at its edges. The attachment architecture releasing point by point as the incantation moves through it. The fragment resists. They always resist. This one resists with the additional force of 16 years of integration, and Snape holds the incantation through the resistance, the way he held the reliquary's ceiling in 1991. Not with force. With precision, the incantation exactly what it needs to be and no more. 5 minutes, Hermione says. Fragment at 40% coherence. Vital suspension holding. The fragment collapses inward, faster than the objects, perhaps because the host's suspension removes the warmth that sustained it. It collapses, and then it is absent. The scar's magical signature revising in the same way the other Horcruxes revised, the architectural change instantaneous at the point of completion. Fragment dissolved, Hermione says, scar resonance clear. A pause, 2 seconds, the documentation parchment receiving the output. Harry is clean. Snape speaks the reversal. The suspension lifts. Harry breathes. He breathes in the specific way that a person breathes when the mechanism has been offline and comes back online. Not a gasp, not dramatic. The body resuming a process it was built for and returning to it with the simple competence of a system restarting. He looks at the ceiling. Something is different. Not physically. His body is exactly where it was. The stone exactly as cold under his neck. The chamber exactly the same temperature. What is different is the scar. It has always been there as a presence, not usually as pain after the early occlumency work, but as a frequency, the background register of something occupying a location. That frequency is gone. The scar is there, he raises his hand and touches it. The raised skin, the specific shape of it. But it is only that. Skin, a mark. He sits up. Snape is 3 feet away, watching him with the diagnostic grid active. Clean, Snape says. Yes, Harry says. He means it in more than the technical sense, and Snape, reading his face, understands this without requiring elaboration. Sirius crosses the chamber in 4 steps and sits beside Harry on the stone platform, not pulling him into anything. Simply sitting beside him in the close, wait-present way of someone who needs to confirm proximity through physical law rather than through speech. Harry lets him. "How do you feel?" Hermione says. She is still at the monitoring station, the documentation parchment in her hand, but her voice has shifted off the clinical register. Harry thinks about this. He thinks about the lily that wasn't, standing in the threshold space, built from his own longing. He thinks about what she would actually say, not the fragments version, the real version. The version constructed from everything Sirius has told him and everything he has read, and the specific quality of love that leaves a mark in the magic of a 14-month-old child that lasts 16 years. She would say, "Good, now finish it." "Ready," Harry says. He stands. Ron is at the chamber entrance. He looks at Harry standing. "Well," Ron says. "Well," Harry says. "So, he's mortal now." "He's been mortal since July," Hermione says, putting the documentation parchment into her folder. "Now he's mortal, and doesn't have a piece of his soul inside someone who's going to fight him." Ron nods. "Better, significantly," Hermione says. Harry looks at Snape. Snape looks back at him. The monitoring grid is closed. The documentation is Hermione's. The chamber is returning to itself. There is nothing procedural left. "Thank you," Harry says. Snape says nothing. Which is, as Harry has learned across 5 years of Latin at breakfast and occlumency sessions and soup in a narrow kitchen in Cokeworth, its own answer, the specific silence of a man who has received something and has no intention of deflecting it and no interest in performing a response to it. It is enough. They leave the chamber. The astronomy tower above them is dark at this hour. They climb the stairs into the corridor, and the corridor is torchlit and ordinary, and the stone underfoot is the same stone it always is. Voldemort is mortal. He does not know it yet. He will. Voldemort arrives before dawn. The Ministry atrium is empty at this hour, the golden fountain still and unlit. The space stripped of its daytime population of clerks and officials and owls. He wants the Ministry at its most symbolic, which is to say, empty of the people who work in it and full only of what it represents. He has brought 11 Death Eaters. He has not brought Nagini. Nagini has been gone since November. Harry found her in the Welsh countryside via a cold knock tracking grid Hermione built from modified runic sensors. The extraction was clean, and the snake survived it, released into conditions more suitable than 17 years of Dark Lord adjacency. The Horcrux in her is gone. She is simply a large snake in Wales, which is a better outcome than most involved parties expected. Voldemort does not know this. He has been operating on the assumption that he has anchors, that the network of protection he built across 50 years of calculated murder is intact. He is wrong about all of it. He simply does not know he is wrong. Harry is in the atrium when Voldemort arrives. He has been there for 20 minutes, long enough for the cold to get into his coat, and for the fountain to stop being an interesting architectural detail and become simply the thing in the center of the room. He is alone. His choice, made 2 weeks ago in the planning session at Grimmauld Place and not contested by anyone present, because everyone present understood what the choice was based on. He wanted to be here at the end of his own story. The Death Eaters fan into the atrium through the fireplaces in the specific formation of people who have rehearsed this entrance. Voldemort himself through the central fireplace last, the tall figure in dark robes stepping into the atrium with the controlled authority of a man who has decided this is how his victory looks. He sees Harry. He stops. The atrium is quiet. The fountain is still. The early morning light coming through the upper windows is the grey of London in March, flat and without warmth, illuminating everything with the flat total clarity of a thing that does not care what it reveals. "Harry Potter," Voldemort says. "Tom," Harry says. The Death Eaters adjust. This is the name that does things to rooms, and it does something to this one, a shift in the specific quality of the Death Eaters' stillness, the difference between disciplined waiting and the waiting of people who have just heard something that does not fit the operational briefing. Voldemort's face does not change. It is not, in truth, a face that changes easily. The years and the Horcrux damage have left it in the register of a thing that has been refined past the point where refinement is an improvement. The features sharp and fixed and pale in the way of something that has been pulling heat from itself for too long. "You came alone," Voldemort says. "Yes. That is either very brave or very foolish." Harry looks at him. "You're mortal. You've been mortal since July. All 7 Horcruxes are gone. The Wraith fragment from 1991, the diary, the locket, the ring, the cup, the diadem, Nagini, and the 8th fragment, which was in my scar, dissolved in October. You have no anchors. You have no return. You are Tom Riddle, 71 years old, standing in the Ministry of Magic with 11 people, who are here because they are afraid of you. And you are about to find out what mortality feels like from the inside." Voldemort looks at him. What moves across his face in the 3 seconds after that sentence is the most human thing Harry has ever seen on it. Not rage. Not the performed contempt. Not the cold authority. Fear. The specific, structural fear of a person who has oriented their entire existence around a single belief and is encountering, in real time, evidence that the belief is false. He casts. The killing curse crosses the atrium in the specific green that Harry has seen in the mirror of his mother's eyes, and in Pensieve's, and in his own constructed memory of Godric's Hollow. And Harry is not there when it arrives. Trained movement. 5 years of Sirius teaching him the combat theory he learned in the First War, and Snape teaching him the advanced defensive casting that the Auror program does not cover. The curse hits the fountain's stone basin, and the basin cracks, and water begins to spread across the atrium floor in a slow, wide sheet. Harry casts back. Not the killing curse. He has thought about this. In sessions and alone, and in the specific hours between 3 and 5, and when thoughts like this conduct themselves without invitation. He does not want to kill Voldemort with the killing curse. Not because of sentiment. Because Tom Riddle has spent 50 years running from death, and the killing curse is fast, and Harry does not think fast is correct. What he casts is the Elder Futhark dissolution sequence. The same sequence Snape used in the dungeon in 1991, learned from the Prince Grimoire, practiced in the Grimmauld Place ritual room until Harry could produce it wandlessly under pressure. The sequence that does not destroy the soul but completes it, forces the torn, fragmented, desecrated remnant of Tom Riddle's soul through the process it has been refusing to undergo for 50 years. Voldemort tries to move. He is fast. He was always fast. The 71-year-old body is not what the body was in 1945 or in 1970, but it is fast enough that the first sequence misses. The second does not. It connects at the center of Voldemort's chest, where the damage is worst, the soul's remnant concentrated there. The fracture lines visible to Harry's trained eye the way all the years of cold knock sensitivity have made damaged soul matter visible. The specific register of a thing that has been broken into pieces and has been trying to hold the pieces together through will alone for longer than Harry has been alive. Voldemort stops moving. Not because the curse forces him to stop. Because the dissolution sequence does not operate through force. It operates through completion. It offers the remnant soul the resolution it has been refusing. The passage it has been barricading, and in the moment of contact the soul recognizes what it is being offered and cannot refuse. Because refusal is a function of a coherent will, and Voldemort's will has been fragmenting for 50 years, and is no longer coherent enough to refuse. He falls. Not dramatically. The tall figure in the dark robes descends the way things descend, when the thing holding them up has been removed, straight down, every part arriving at once, the water from the broken fountain basin, already spreading across the floor to meet him. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Born December 31st, 1926. Died March 3rd, 1998. The 11 Death Eaters stand in the atrium for approximately 4 seconds. Then they run. The aftermath is ministry business, and Harry lets it be ministry business. Bones has Aurors at every exit within 8 minutes. The alarm grid that Hermione helped install in January triggered the moment unregistered apparition signatures appeared in the atrium. 7 Death Eaters are apprehended in the building. 3 more in the surrounding streets. The 11th, Lucius Malfoy, is found in his own apparition arrival point, arrested in his entrance hall, the specific indignity of which will be noted in the records. Harry sits on the edge of the broken fountain basin and waits. He is not injured. He is cold, because the water from the basin is across most of the atrium floor, and the March morning is coming in through a door someone left open during the evacuation, and cold is a manageable condition that does not require intervention. Hermione arrives through the east entrance at 6:34 am. She looks at the atrium. At Voldemort. At Harry on the fountain edge. She crosses the atrium, stepping over the water, and sits beside him. "Done," Harry says. "Done," she says. They sit there for a moment in the particular quiet that follows the end of very loud things, a quiet that is not empty but full of everything that was done and everything it cost and everything that comes after, which is not nothing, is in fact the largest category of the three. Ron comes in behind her. He looks at Voldemort. Looks at Harry. Looks at the water on the floor. "The fountain's ruined," he says. "Yes," Harry says. "They'll rebuild it." Probably. Ron sits on Harry's other side, the three of them on the edge of the broken fountain with the March light coming in gray and flat, and the water spreading slowly across the atrium floor, and the sounds of the ministry reactivating around them, voices in corridors, boots on the stairwells, the specific institutional noise of a building that has had something happen in it, and is beginning the process of determining what comes next. 6 months later. September 1st, 1998. Dumbledore stands at the head of the Great Hall and looks at the hall, 4 tables. The new first years sorted and seated, the older students returned, the staff at the high table in their customary positions. "I have an announcement," he says, "regarding a change in Hogwarts' leadership, effective at the close of this academic year. I will be retiring in June. After 57 years of association with this institution in various capacities, I find that the specific work I was doing here is complete, and that the institution is better served by what comes next than by what has been." He looks at the staff table. The Board of Governors has confirmed the appointment of the incoming headmaster, effective July 1st. Professor Severus Snape. The hall responds in the way that halls respond to unexpected news. Not silence, not uproar, the specific volume of a large number of people processing simultaneously. At the staff table, Snape's face does nothing. Harry, at the Gryffindor table, returned for his final year. His 8th, the year that was taken by a war and given back by its ending. Watches Snape's face do nothing, and reads. In the nothing, the specific quality of a man who knew this was coming, and has been sitting with it long enough that the announcement is not the news. The news was earlier, in a private meeting. What Harry is watching now is a man who has already processed what it means to be headmaster of the school where his mother was a student, where he was a student, where he has taught for 17 years, where he killed Voldemort's first attempt at return, in a dungeon corridor on Halloween night in 1991. Snape's eyes move to Harry's. Harry nods once. Snape returns his attention to the feast. The Dagworth Granger Research Wing opens in November. It is the east wing of the Hogwarts Library, extended through a spatial expansion charm that Hermione designed, adding 400 square feet without altering the library's external dimensions. The wing houses the Prince Grimoire Archive, the materials Snape has donated from his personal collection. The Peverell-era texts that Dumbledore contributed from the headmaster's office holdings, and the research library that Hermione has been building since 4th year, now formally documented and organized. It is named the Dagworth Granger Research Wing at Snape's suggestion, which he made in a letter to the board that contained exactly one sentence beyond the proposal. It is correct that the institution's research resources bear the name of the person most responsible for their organization. Hermione reads the board's confirmation letter 3 times. Then she goes to the library and starts cataloging. Late. The school quiet. November. Snape walks the dungeon corridors. He does this the way he has done it for 17 years, not patrol, not inspection. The old habit of a man who thinks best in motion and has always thought best in these specific corridors. The cold and the stone and the particular quality of dungeon dark that is different from the dark upstairs, denser, older. The dark of a place that has been underground for 1,000 years and has its own relationship with the absence of light. He stops in the corridor where the array was. The stone is unmarked. The phosphor compounds dissolved 7 years ago. You would not know anything happened here. This is the nature of old magic done correctly. It does not leave a scar on the place where it was used. It simply was, and then it was complete, and the place returned to itself. Harry is there. He comes the way he always comes, without announcing it, following instinct. Standing slightly to one side in the manner that Snape has learned to read as consideration rather than deference, making room for what comes next rather than occupying the center of it. They stand in the dungeon corridor. The dark. The cold. "Do you come here a lot?" Harry asks. "Sometimes. To think about that night? To think about what came after." Harry nods. A long pause. The comfortable kind. The kind that does not require filling. "I named my first Patronus class assignment after her," he says. "Lily's class. Patronus theory. The students don't know who Lily is. I like it that way." Snape says nothing. Which is its own answer. Has always been its own answer. They walk back up toward the inhabited part of the school. The corridor rises toward the warmth and the light of the upper floors. The sound of the castle, distant, present, alive with the specific noise of 1,000 years of children being taught things, and sometimes learning them, and sometimes not, and returning anyway. The institution persisting through its own particular combination of failure and getting it right. Behind them, the dungeons are quiet and cold and old and hold everything that happened in them without giving any of it back. That is their function. It is enough. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.